In a world where trauma is real, where people seek out distraction from their internal lives and relationships with others, and where no one is taught healthy self-care, help was needed. In 2019, the mission began. Find a way to help people understand and better their mental health. Seek out ways to explore relationships and how they work. Fight against the stigmas that surround counseling and therapy. And, most importantly,
do all of that so you don't have to be a therapist to understand it. Hey everybody. Welcome to Season 2 of Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me here in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. This week's guest is Megan Moir. Megan is a therapist, coach, and speaker located here in Nashville. She works with men and women who are high achievers and performers and helps people who look really great on the outside like the person they are on the inside too. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're doing that, help other people find the show by giving it a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. This is an A and B conversation, so see your way out of it and dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Megan, hi.
Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for coming on. It is such a pleasure. I am so excited. So I like to start every conversation with a guest by just asking why therapy? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. So I think an interesting thing about my story is I never really planned on becoming a therapist. Actually, it was interesting though. I was cleaning some stuff out and I found a paper that I wrote in high school that talked about wanting to be a psychologist. So I think it was always somewhere inside of me, but I actually went to school and did my undergrad in accounting and marketing. So definitely more of the business side of things. And then got out and worked in business for a little bit and really just saw that I wanted to do something a lot more relational. But even there, still didn't know exactly what that would look like. And I was actually recruited by some friends to move to Nashville and ended up coaching the golf team at Trevecca. And they said, we can pay you this and also you can go to school for free. And at that point I'd had a master's in sports leadership and then I'd had the business undergrad stuff going on. So I was like, well, I'm kind of interested in counseling, and I had done some of my own counseling work as well. And so I was like, I'll just take a few classes. And what ended up happening is I really I'd done some counseling in the past, but I kicked that up to overdrive big time and actually found some freedom and some healing and kind of just continued down the counseling path. I didn't even know if I would be a therapist even after I got out of school. I was kind of like, I'll just try this for a while, and even still was pretty hesitant. But eventually started working for myself and having more clients that I really liked working with, and kind of just kept going.
Well, I'm so curious. I think you said that you had this paper from high school that talked about being a psychologist. I know that, where I was from and the people that were in my family and my friends and stuff, nobody I knew had gone to therapy. So there wasn't any kind of framework in which I understood what therapy or psychology was other than what I saw on television.
Right.
What had you had a picture of what a psychologist was in your head? Where did you get that from?
Yeah, so I had been to therapy really early on, initially for an eating disorder, probably my sophomore year of high school. And I don't know, other than myself, I don't know that I knew anybody that went to therapy. What I did know is that it was only for like, I mean, I felt a lot of shame about going. And so I think I just thought that the therapeutic world was really only for like weird people or messed up people. And then even further than that, if you were, the therapist I had worked with when I was young seemed pretty, I don't have a better word other than they just seem weird to me, like unlike anybody I knew in my normal life. Like, and so even there was so much judgment of like, even if I wanted to do this, it would be not really accepted in the world that I came from. So it was a lot of shame around like me going to therapy was very shameful. And then I sure as heck wouldn't want to go into the field because everybody I knew was so different than like a psychologist or a psychiatrist would even be.
Than that one therapist that you had met with.
Yeah. Well, I met with a couple by then, but even still, they weren't like the people from my like culture. That was really a lot more performance driven. And so the therapists that I had seen were so much like slower and kinder and warmer. That really I had come from a culture of productivity and achievement.
Weirdos.
Yeah, right. So I think also it wasn't really until I got further along in my own journey too that I met people that for lack of a better words, like I met therapists that I thought were normal, or more like me. And I think that was like kind of eye-opening to me of like, oh, maybe I could do this too, because here's some people that are easier for me to connect with. Yeah, and it took a while too for me to realize, I remember actually crying when I was in grad school about, I had taken the Strengths Finder. Are you familiar with that test?
Yeah.
You are? Okay. So I still remember my strengths. They were, the first one was woo, which is like the ability to win others over. And then the other ones were like, let's see, like communicator, strategic, activator, and arranger. And then it spit out like, possible career choices for me were to be like a CEO. All of them were in the business world. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is such confirmation that I'm really not supposed to be a therapist, because everybody else in the group I had things like listener and empathy and some of these more like therapeutic type strengths. But it's really interesting because in the work that I do now, the type of clients that I work with who are more high achiever, performance, really driven individuals, those strengths, like I like what you're saying about like you can really be you, because even for me, those strengths that I have really make me a better therapist for the type of clients that I see.
And that's something that's always amazed me about what we get to do is that, no matter who you are, there's clients out there that need you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever story you come from, there's clients out there that need you. The more you can be, the more you can help, those clients.
Right. And that's something I wish that I would have known sooner. I actually laugh about it now because it seems so obvious to me. But in the beginning, when I started my own therapeutic work, I think I just had this assumption that like, okay, here's the therapist that I found and here's the therapist I see, and, everybody's the same as them. But now I laugh because I'm like, oh, the first thing I tell people is like, you have to make sure you're a good fit with a therapist. And every one of us is so different that if like you don't feel like you're jiving with somebody, it doesn't mean that therapy isn't for you. It might just be that therapist isn't a good fit. Yeah, it doesn't happen. I think we also live in a more advanced like world than, the first time I went to my own therapy was probably 15 years ago. My parents probably took me to the only therapist that they knew or that someone told them. Whereas now there's so much more resources with like podcasts and Instagram and, people's websites and stuff. I think off the bat, people already have a better shot of finding somebody that's a good fit. I always tell people like your first and best like option is to ask somebody or to ask another therapist that you know,
Mm-hmm.
like who would be a good fit. So I totally agree with you there.
Well, let's talk about a movie.
Yeah.
What movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
So I brought, it really is my favorite movie ever, even though when I went to look at it, search it on Google, I was like, gosh, it really has some critical reviews there, but it's called Save the Last Dance, and it is a great throwback from the early 2000s.
Oh yeah. I I was telling my wife this morning, I have vivid memories of the theater that I saw this movie in. Like I can
That's
remember going to
amazing.
see it at a certain theater when I was in college. I have no idea who I saw it with,
Hmm.
but I mean, I remember going to see it. Came out in 2001, which is like, I mean, blew my mind thinking about that because it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but I guess it does.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was watching it with some friends last night, and we were just laughing so much about like the outfits and so many different things in the movie. And I was like, guys,
Oh yeah.
it was basically right out of the 90s. I mean, essentially when they shot that, when they probably filmed the
Mm-hmm.
movie, it was probably the late 90s or 2000. And so it was really like actually a little scary to think about how long ago the movie was made. Um, but we were laughing a lot.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was a while ago. I pulled up this morning and I feel like this is appropriate considering the era in which this was made. Although maybe these weren't around back then, but I pulled up a BuzzFeed list of facts, things you didn't know from Save the Last Dance.
Oh, great.
Which I don't actually remember if BuzzFeed was around then, but this list certainly is around now. One of them was that Julia Stiles, she ended up doing all of her hip hop and most of her ballet dancing herself, but she did use a stunt double for the On Point ballet.
Okay, I was actually wondering about that. That's helpful to know.
Yeah, it says she didn't have any formal dance training before they started, but she had grown up dancing. So throughout filming, she took choreography classes on the weekends.
Huh. And do you know, I didn't know this. Is Julia Stiles, was Save the Last Dance before or after 10 Things I Hate About You?
After, because one of the things in here is that she was cast. Where's it at? Because they saw the dance that she did on a table in 10 Things I Hate About You. The chair dance that Sarah and Derek rehearse is the same routine as the Backstreet Boys do in their video for As Long as You Love Me.
That's amazing.
It is a movie that's of a very specific era. Like watching it definitely made me think about like 2000, 2001.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that I liked the movie, but really last night I was thinking like, why do I like this movie so much? Which we'll get into, but I think even aside from that, I was thinking about like some of my favorite movies that are more current are like Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody, the movies that have a lot more like singing and sound and dancing and things like that in there. And I really feel like that
Mm-hmm.
was one of the first movies that was kind of like that.
Where you felt like music was like a central part of it.
Yeah, or at least one of the first ones I saw where like the dancing and really more the dancing and then also the music was like the central point of the movie.
So, what is it about this movie that stuck out to you? Like, why'd you pick it?
Yeah, I mean, when I went back and looked at it, like even when I started thinking about different movies, I thought about a lot more like current ones, this one, that one. And then I thought, you know, people are probably familiar with those. And really, I think this movie is like something that really stands out to me from my teenage years as something that really influenced me probably in a lot of ways that I didn't know. It feels like a movie that had a lot of foreshadow in my own life that, you know, as a teenager, I
Mm-hmm.
probably related with a lot of things in the movie, but didn't have the words to talk about it. And so the probably the biggest thing in there is I feel like a huge theme in the movie is, you know, with both lead characters, their fight like to be themselves in a culture that was telling them to be someone else. Um, So like you have the obvious, like they're an interracial couple 20 years ago, which even the world has changed so much more and is more kind, I think, to interracial couples today than it was 20 years ago. But you have that theme of like they love each other and are focused on that, but are both getting a lot of criticism really from the different cultures that they come from. Derek, the African American man, probably more so than I guess her name's Sarah, but the character that Julia Stiles plays. So I think that like really stands out to me and is something that really hits me, you know, probably hit me as a teenager and then definitely hits me now, is this like struggle of, am I going to be who I really am and let the world see that, and really probably have a lot of people not like that, or am I going to conform and be who I'm supposed to be in the world that I'm from? And really I think about that more as like the cultures that we come from, like our individual families or social worlds, than the culture at large.
There is a commonality between Sarah and Derek, but one like stark difference that rises to the top for me is, besides Sarah is literally in Derek's world during the movie, but it's that Derek's like systems around him, his family, his friends, his community, versus Sarah is there because she lost her mom. And I got the impression, maybe they said this, I just can't remember, that maybe her father had been she had been estranged from her father for a while, didn't really know him, and she was there because that was the only family she had left. And so for most of the movie, her and her dad just are not that close. And so, you know, even the, I guess, pushback or conflict that she's getting from quote unquote her world, it's really not her world. It's the world around her that she's now the kind of outsider in.
Right. Yeah, because you know, her like familial relationships are probably a little bit underdeveloped in the movie, but I think that's a really good point. It's like, and probably, I mean, that's another thing that I really like about the movie is she's suffered this great tragedy, and to deal with that loss has really cut off like a huge part of herself. And I mean, I see that in myself, and I also see it in clients that I work with, of, you know, this thing that happened to me was really painful, and I'm going to close the door and not go back in there. So yeah, I would agree with you there. And then I think the part that resonates for me so much with Derek's world is the really like so many people, you know, he's just trying to get up and get out of there and do something with his life. And while people like really respect him for that, there's also this attitude of like, do you think you're better than us? And I think that happens a lot. Like, and, you know, everybody has their different world that they come from. Like sometimes I'll be working with a client and the message from their family is like, you know, don't get above your raisin, or, you know, you're too big for your britches, or you think you're better than us, sort of that thing, because it is an economic, like they're getting up and out. But I think a similar thing happens like when we step into doing our own healing work. A similar thing happens like in our families of, you know, you think you're better than me now because you can have boundaries, or when we really start to get some healing, it shakes up the family system and people will do anything to get back to homeostasis. So I think I can really resonate with that within Derek in a different way. I mean, obviously I'm not a Black man trying to get out of a tough situation to, you know, that kind of thing. But in my own life, it's really more of like an emotional cost of trying to do things a different way, and maybe the way that that's perceived.
So you use the word homeostasis, and that is, you know, the systems that we're in, the relational systems that we're in, be it our family of origin, be it our team at work, our friend group, whatever it is, they have a lot of unwritten rules that govern how they work.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime somebody within that system changes, it rocks the boat. And so the system does its best to correct itself. And sometimes it tries to do that. And I mean this both figuratively and unfortunately literally. Sometimes it tries to do that quite violently.
Mm-hmm.
And even though, you know, neither one of us could know what it's like to experience what Derek is experiencing, I tell clients all the time that are trying to get sober, like, you might experience pushback from your family and friends
Mm-hmm.
because they have expected you to show up in a certain way so far in their relationship with you. And because of that, they have learned how they should show up in relationship to that. And so when you start showing up differently, it may throw off their equilibrium. And I mean, as an example of that, I had a client very early on, a couples client, where the husband actually said, I mean, I thought this was really brave and I really liked that he said it, but he actually said, you know, I miss the you that you were when you were drinking because we had fun.
Yeah.
And since you stopped drinking, I don't think we've had any fun. And obviously we had to unpack that and talk about that, but it was, you know, for the majority of their relationship, he knew how to show up. And then when his wife changed, he no longer knew how to show up. And so it by her doing her work, it invited him into doing work. And I think for those of us who choose to go to therapy as a client, we're just like, yeah, cool, this is a choice that I'm making. I know what I'm stepping into. But then those around us that are invited into change and that kind of stuff may feel rocked by it because they didn't necessarily choose it. So the system tries to correct itself, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that can be really hard, you know, even individually. I've experienced some of that, but then in the work that I do with people, you know, it's easy when someone's coming in weekly, working their butt off to make some changes in their life, to get a life that they, you know, want. And it can be really easy to look around and say, why doesn't everybody like this? Like, why aren't people rooting me on? You know, I've actually been sober for 5 years. And some of that was a little bit of my journey in the beginning of like, gosh, I'm doing all this stuff to improve my life. And like, I've stopped drinking and I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And a little bit of me, I think because people around me maybe in some ways didn't know how to respond. I was like, gosh, I'm doing all this. And, you know, I wasn't getting the response maybe I hoped for. And really kind of like you're talking about with your client, a lot of that is coming from a place of like, people need time to adjust to you. And then there's also like, as we get some healing, you know, it does force other people like to also look at themselves, whether they want to or not. It's like you want to work on yourself, so you're going to therapy, but then inadvertently, you're holding up a mirror to other people who may not want a mirror held up to them.
Yeah, I had a client this week who is in the midst of a divorce, and just the other day, his brother called him and said that he was getting divorced. And my client said to me, that phone call just hurt me so much. And I said, oh, tell me how it hurt you. And he like paused for a sec and was like, it just reminded me of my own pain. You know? And so it's sometimes by a person close to us doing work, it really shows us, oh, there's some work that I need to do. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that, or if you're not, I shouldn't say willing, because maybe you're just not ready to acknowledge it, you know, and proceed with it, it can be really, really tough.
Yeah, which I love that you brought up the example of, you know, somebody getting sober, because I think it is one of the most obvious places that it shows up, where, you know, maybe you were somebody who drank heavily, and all of a sudden you're not drinking anymore, and you're in your friend group or you're around your family, and they really, really want you to keep drinking, because if you don't, just by the fact that you're doing something different, it creates all these feelings in them And so there really is that return. Like, I think as human beings, like, we want things to stay in a place of familiarity and balance, even if that thing that's familiar isn't very helpful for you. You know, most of the time, we as human beings will choose what's familiar, even if it's really painful, over something that we're not familiar with. Because at least if it's going to hurt us, at least we know how it's going to hurt and how it's going to feel, versus stepping into this new territory, which we don't know.
Yeah, it's that, the known pain over the unknown good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think the point of change really is hitting your stride. Like, I laugh at my own therapeutic journey so much, because I'm like, really what it was, I didn't know if any of the therapeutic stuff I was doing, like going to counseling and getting sober and all this stuff, I didn't really know if it was going to work. But what I did know is, like, I had some version of hope of it had to be better than what I was like doing right now. So it really only took like a small amount of hope that, like, this has to be different than what I'm currently doing. Like, it can't get any worse.
That sounds like a rock bottom.
Yeah.
I read a book a little while ago called 10% Happier, which there's an app and all of that goes along with it now. It's Dan Harris, who's an anchor for, I think, Good Morning America. He had a panic attack live on air, and then that kind of led him into a mindfulness journey.
Nice.
But the name of the book and this app and the company comes from, somebody asking him, well, does mindfulness really make, life that much easier to bear? And he said, I think it makes me 10% happier, and that's worth it to me. And that sounds to me kind of where you were at then. Like,
yeah, I love
even
that.
if it gives me a little bit more, that's better than where I'm at now. Yeah. So it's really clear that, like, both Derek and Sarah were kind of going against the grain in the systems that they were in. One, I guess, quote or kind of description of the movie that I was reading this morning said, it has that kind of Romeo and Juliet quality to it, where, both people are coming from a system that doesn't want them to be together. Although I think I would argue that Sarah wasn't coming from that.
Right.
Because she didn't really have a system. But what else in the movie sticks out to you?
Yeah, let's see. I think her, inner conflict, again, like losing her mom, and then this conflict around, like, if she was going to let her dad actually be a part of her life, and really getting to see the way that, like, initially she was totally closed off to, like, her grief, and then slowly, like, how she let that open up, because she really saw if she was going to allow herself to really be in a relationship with Derek, that was going to have to be possible. A scene that sticks out to me is, like, when he planned this really great date to celebrate, and he took her to this ballet, and she's standing outside, and she's like, oh, hell no, I'm not going in there. But you could almost tell in the movie that she knew, if I, like, basically, if I stay in my denial, I'm really going to hurt this person I love. And so she really had to make a choice. Like, am I going to face this pain in my life, or am I going to hurt, like, this person in front of me and really create more pain? Which I think we all have moments like that of, pain that we've tried to bury, and then we start to see it surfacing and really hurting other relationships in our lives. And we have to make a choice. Are we going to, like, step into this pain and allow some healing to happen, or are we going to continue to, like, shove it down and just suffer?
Yeah, I don't even know if she made a decision to, share, that part of her story with Derek in that moment. It almost just seemed like it came sloshing over the top.
Right. Yeah, it was more of a decision to, like, I think the decision was more like, am I going to reject this man I love who tried to do something nice to me? Or am I going to, like, go along with it?
That moment felt really profound to me, just because I know that I think, I mean, they're in high school in the movie, right?
Yeah, even though they seem like they're like 30 years old, but it is high school.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so they're in high school, and I know that, right around in middle school is when our brains really start to develop the ability to think abstractly. Previous to that, it's all concrete thought, and developmentally, that's why, you know, it seems like kids are really selfish, although they're not selfish. They might be egocentric, but they're not
Hmm.
selfish because they literally can't conceive of other people's worlds.
Right.
So it may seem like the world revolves around them, but it's because that's how they conceptualize the world. And that's why a lot of kids, if their parents get divorced, blame themselves because they can't conceive of something like that happening and it not being their fault because they're involved in everything that goes on in the world. And I think that is, what happened, even though, the character Sarah is in high school, she's a little older, she has that abstract thought piece, although it's still developing. She put the totality of the blame of her mom's death on her in really kind of a falling of the dominoes kind of way. I was mad at her and wanted her to come to my recital and yelled at her, and that's why she was in a hurry, and that's why she was driving at that time, and that's why she got into that wreck.
Right, which is really like, I love that you brought that up earlier, even about kids. It's like that's really a survival strategy that ideally we would grow out of. But as children, I think about, and I tell this to clients a lot, if a child has like a situation that happens and they have two choices, they're going to blame the parent, and think like, wow, my mom or dad, you know, can't help me, or they're going to blame themselves of like, well, it's probably my fault, um, and I caused this. And most of the time, the child is going to blame themselves, because if they blame the parent, like, your chance of survival is much lower. Like, even if we go back to, whenever the child is so dependent on the parent that they really can't blame the parent. They have to blame themselves. And then also, like, even in blaming ourselves, it gives us this false sense or this illusion that we have more power than we do. Like in the movie, it's her blaming herself makes
Yeah.
it seem like she would have had the power to stop her mom from dying, which we all know isn't like
Yeah.
logical, but it does feel better to blame yourself because you don't have to feel as powerless as probably you really are over a lot of things.
Yeah. And also feelings aren't logical.
Hmm.
So I mean, that's something that I've had clients say a lot before is like, well, it doesn't make any sense that I feel this way. And I said, why are you trying to have it make sense? Like, your feelings can't be wrong. The story that you're telling yourself can be wrong, but the feelings surrounding that story can't be. And I think it reminds me of, her response to her mom's death and her blaming herself was, well, now I'm going to create this rule. And that rule is that I can't do ballet anymore
Hmm.
because my ballet is what caused my mom to die. So, you called it, a survival instinct or a survival mechanism. And I think that's exactly it. And I have had so many clients, and not only that, I mean, I've done this in my own life. You have this hurt or this trauma or this pain that takes place in your childhood early on, and then you as a child create this hardline rule
Hmm.
in an effort to deal with your world because you're so limited in how you can deal with it, especially if you don't have guidance in how to do that. So you create this blanket rule that you think is going to keep you safe, but then you carry that rule along with you as you journey through life into adulthood. And I had a friend one time who, and I think he's the first person who conceptualized it this way for me, but he said, I got hurt by my dad when I was 8 years old, and so I made this rule up that I would never let anybody get close to my heart again. And here I am at 38, and I'm still living according to that rule that 8-year-old made up.
Yeah,
And he
these
goes,
vows.
that's really funny to me because, that's really funny to me because I wouldn't ask an 8-year-old today, what do you think I should do?
Mm-hmm.
But every time I make a decision to close my heart off to somebody, I ask my 8-year-old self what I should do, and I listen to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really important, like, for any of us to really get to know the vows that we've made to ourselves, which the one you brought up is, you're calling it rules. Rule or vow. It feels so much heavier to me. And so I think a lot of us have these vows of, I did this and like, I'll never do that again. Whether it's relationally or some other way, I'll never allow myself to be that vulnerable again because it didn't go well for me. And once we become aware of the vows, and like you're kind of saying about your friend, aware of the vows and aware of how old we are or how old we were when we made this vow, then we can actually talk to that part of ourselves, the younger part normally of ourselves, and help it get what it needs. So then we can like live our lives and do relationship from our adult selves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of my therapists, when I was a client, did an exercise where, like, I sat down on the bed, not an actual bed. There was like a, stackable chair or whatever it was. But I sat down on the bed next to my childhood self and, what does that childhood self version of you need? And what can you offer as yourself today to that childhood self? And also know that you have the ability to do that anytime that you need to.
Yeah.
And I think there was something about that exercise that helped me kind of shift my perspective, because I think there's something in a person where it's like easier to offer other people grace and compassion than it is ourselves. And so if we can kind of zoom out of ourselves in a way to offer that to others, or at least picture we are offering it to others, but it's really us, there's something magical about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the example you're bringing up because I do, so much empty chair and talking to the younger version of ourselves in our office. And like, I'm always asking clients, how old do you feel when this happened or that happened? But I've actually also seen that as a really, like, a way that's helped me to relate to people in just a much kinder way, even in my life in my office, but then also outside of my office, is, so many of us walk around and our physical bodies are so much older than our emotional selves are at any given moment. And so even with people in my life that are tough to maybe love or care for, it's been really helpful for me to ask myself, not from a judgment standpoint, but really from an assessment standpoint of like, gosh, like how old is this person emotionally? And then once you establish that, oh, they're kind of like, a lot younger than I would have ever expected, then we can actually relate to them in a place that's kind, that a younger person might need.
Yeah, or even just trying to understand or picture or empathize with the suffering that the other might be going through, and realizing that you have part of something inside of you that has gone through the same thing. So there's that innate connection, possibility of connection that can happen. And it's something that I'm challenged with all the time, is just to continue to remember that. And I think as a person, it's almost, which I guess it's a learned skill. I was going to say it's sometimes easier to do that in the therapy room with clients than it is in real life. And it's almost like I have to remember, oh, wait, like, of course, your clients are people, but also the people in your life are people.
Yeah. I actually have next to my bed, I have a picture of like myself as probably, I'm looking at it right now, I'm probably, I don't know, five or six. And then I have a picture of Eric, my fiance, at like 5 or 6 years old as well, because obviously, I mean, even everybody's probably experienced this even more so in coronavirus, but I find that like when I'm really frustrated with myself or frustrated with him, looking at like the younger version of myself or of him really brings me back to this place of like kindness and compassion. of remembering like that precious like child that lives inside of all of us.
Yeah, I think that just kind of speaks to this. And what's interesting, it reminds me of a part of the movie. So Derek had a friend, I think his name was Malachi.
Mm-hmm.
I might be misremembering
Yeah, that's
that.
right.
Yeah, Malachi. Yeah, who who was in the band or the rap group Onyx back in the day. But you know, Sarah had this experience with Malachi where he like threatened her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was talking to Derek about it, and she was like, he's crazy, he's dangerous, he's, mean. And Derek jumped to his defense and was like, he is what he has to be to make it through. And she says, well, you're from the same place, like, you guys are so different. And he says, we're not different at all, we're the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it rings true with what you're talking about right now, because it's recognizing, the true self inside of all of us and how much each of our true selves has in common. No matter
Right.
what the candy shell on the outside looks like, the chocolate inside is all the same.
Mm-hmm.
To use M&Ms as a metaphor.
Right. And the inside, which I think is a lot easier to see in a child, like even when, Eric and I are arguing or something, I'm seeing physically like adult to adult, but it's really that child, the picture of him as a child that brings me back, or the picture of me as a child that brings me back to this innocence and this like really basic human need to belong and to matter and to be loved. And I think that's really what children are so good at, is they don't have all these masks and all these defenses that we as adults have developed that keep us from being able to see that.
Yeah, and most of the time it's adults that like teach the kids how to employ those things,
Mm-hmm.
Intentionally or unintentionally. So there's a very real, I guess, when we get to a certain point in adulthood, we kind of have to relearn how to be a person.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that's what it ultimately is. Even when I think about therapy, like I'm not trying. Like, when people come to therapy, I think a lot of times people are wanting us to do like a lobotomy of some sort, like take out this part of my brain and fix it and put it back in. And it's like, no, like we don't want to do that. Like nothing about you is broken. Like you might have some injuries that need a lot of healing. But I see like our own healing work as not this like recreation of a better version of us or a better person, but it's really like a process of working on these injuries that we've suffered and these defense mechanisms or masks or whatever you want to call them that really keep us from being able to be our truest self. And so it really is like, I love the word recovery, because it really is like we are recovering the truest parts of ourselves versus like producing or recreating these new ones.
I've only had a few clients ask me, why do you call it recovery? And I love that question. I think it's just because it almost is like when they get introduced to the word or the concept, it just becomes a folder in their head that they file stuff in. This thing is just called recovery, but why is it called that? And it really is. It's reconnecting with that part of yourself that you had to cover up and protect to make it through. And really, that's one of the things I think that I have done with every client of mine that's pursuing recovery, is to show them that, whatever they are pursuing recovery from, be it a substance addiction, a process addiction, which are addictive behaviors, that was a coping strategy that you employed to make it, and it was successful because you're still here. But just because a coping strategy is successful doesn't necessarily mean that it's helpful, and it could be harming them. And if we look at it as a tool, let's get some new tools, while also trying to resolve the things that we have hurt from that, inspired us to pick up those old tools.
Yeah, I think the other scene that sticks out to me that I've never really thought about. I mean, because let's just get down to it. Essentially, part of the reason probably why I love Save Last Dance is because I wish that I could dance like that, but I have pretty much zero rhythm. So there's that. But watching it last night as I was preparing for talking to you today, I saw a lot of things through a different lens other than my wish that I would be a better dancer. But what really stood out to me too was in the beginning when Sarah, her mom dies and she goes to live with her dad and she's at her first day of school. And I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I would not wish that upon anyone. And we were kind of, the people I was watching it with, we were kind of laughing about like how uncomfortable that would be. And she gets to this scene in the lunchroom. And I told my friend I was watching it with, I was like, I think I would have like gone and eaten in the library or something. But she gets to this scene in the movie where she has a choice of where she's going to sit at lunch. And she goes over to, I think her name's Chanel, who ends up being a big part in the movie. And she goes over and she basically makes an attempt to sit with her. And then, the movie plays out and Chanel ends up coming back over to Sarah, and they kind of develop this friendship. And it really struck me as like Sarah's decision to be brave in that one moment really set the stage for the rest of the movie. Like, had she not had the courage to step out of her comfort zone and go sit with this girl that she really didn't know, that was probably a really, really scary and intimidating thing to do. Like, so many events in her life, or what we see in the movie would have been a totally different movie. And so I think about that, like, even like in, my own life or in clients' lives, like, I think about that kind of stuff, like these moments where I kind of have a decision to like turn right or turn left. Like Sarah could have walked out of the cafeteria and gone to the library and sat by herself, and she would have had a totally different story. But she, if that was the left turn, she kind of made the right turn, which was going and putting herself out there to make a friend. And then as we see the movie go on, that friend ends up leading her to Derek, and they end up having, the story that they have, and like everything came really out of that one decision. And I don't think life is so like, not that we have to stress out about every decision we make. I think life finds a way of working itself out. But it really did stand out to me of like these choices that we have and how much of an impact they have on the rest of our lives that we couldn't possibly have the foreshadow to see.
Yeah, she could have done the Mean Girls thing where she went and ate in the bathroom stall.
Right.
But she didn't. And like, I think that, since we were speaking recovery language earlier, it really kind of rings true to just do the next right thing. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know what to do, just do what you feel like is the next right thing. And sometimes it's not a matter of like a moral choice. Sometimes it's not a matter, because, what cafeteria table she sat at, there's no right or wrong table.
Right.
But for her, maybe in that moment, the right thing was just choosing to have courage, choosing to be brave, and going up to people they didn't know really well and trying to strike up a conversation. And that ended up adding so much to her life.
Mm-hmm. I love how you've brought that up as like, it's not a moral issue. And I think that's the part that I like also was trying to get across, and you said it so much better than me. But yeah, these decisions that aren't really, they're not big moral issues. It really is like, did she feel like having the courage that day to go up to somebody, or did she kind of need to go eat alone? And we all are faced with issues like this every single day. And really, every study and all the evidence out there would say that life is so much more about like the small, like daily task than it is these like big monumentous moments in our lives. I'm sure you've worked with clients who are like, basically, what happened in my life to make me this way, and kind of want me to find this big trauma that they had. And I'm always like, it was probably a little trauma, like not little, but a like small t, as we would call it, something that was happening every day over and over and over and over again, tends to affect people. I say to people, is it a pound of feathers are a pound of bricks, like in terms of like a big T trauma versus a little T trauma. But anyway, that was an aside to say that it really is these small, or what we're deeming small decisions, but the ones that we're making every day that really add up to make us who we are. And one of the things that like really, if I really want to scare myself, I go back and think about like all of the things I could have decided differently that wouldn't have given me the really, really wonderful life I have today. You know, like I think about if I wouldn't have gone on the first date with Eric, because I thought I had, 100 valid reasons to, not go. And really those were just because I was so scared. Or if I hadn't taken my, if I hadn't taken the counseling classes at Trevecca, or if I hadn't had friends in Nashville, or if I hadn't gotten on the plane to go to rehab, or if I hadn't made the decision to keep walking in recovery every single day, even when it was hard. There's like so many things I look at because I really do have a life that I really, really love and enjoy, and really is beautiful and still has its own struggles. But it scares me to think about like all of the, little decisions that I could have made differently and how my life would be different.
Yeah. And I think that one of the beautiful things about recovery is, once you get to steps 2 and 3, you realize that there's something bigger than you at work in the world, even if it's just the world itself. Mm-hmm. And so part of learning that, you don't have to be as selfish and as egocentric and believe that, the world revolves around you. Part of that is also realizing that you're not responsible for everything, the good and the bad. Mm-hmm. And, realizing that, and it's so easier to see in retrospect, in looking back, but realizing that, all of these things that were occurring when I was in those moments and lamenting them were adding up to a bigger story.
Yeah.
And it's part of being able to look back and see that is this ability, this tapestry, this beauty from the ashes, so to speak.
Yeah.
I had a buddy, one of my groomsmen called me up. I want to say this was a week or 2 ago, but asked me really randomly, because we were not talking about anything related to this, but he was like, do you ever think back on those years where like, you had left that job and you had done this and you were in such pain, but it really led to this other great thing? And I was like, oh my gosh, every single day, every single day, I realized that these parts of my life where I was experiencing such pain and like crying out to God saying, how could you do this to me? The next thing that happened after that led to this other thing, which led to this other thing, which led to exactly where I am today. Mm-hmm. And I think the big thing behind that for me is just humility. For me, it's a learned humility that I can't do everything, and I haven't done everything for me. And so it kind of helps me release a little bit. It helps me let go, It helps me to realize, not only is it really a bad thing for me to try to be in control of everything, but I don't have to be in control of everything.
Yeah, I love that you're mentioning that. It's like knowing, we're in so many ways we're powerless, and also in so many ways we do have power. And so it's really like, before we jumped on here, you were mentioning the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. But it really is these, like, we have these choices that are before us, and then also we have to trust that there's someone or something bigger than us that's also factoring into that. And, I have people, we're in the Bible Belt, so I work with people who, are Christians, and I work with people who are Jewish, and I work with people who are Buddhist, and all sorts of different things. But one of the things that always makes me laugh is when people are saying like, well, if God opens this door, I'll do this. But if he opens that door, I'll do that. And I'm like, yes, like to some degree, trusting in something bigger than yourself. And then also, I'm pretty sure, I'm not a biblical scholar, but I'm pretty sure it says like, knock and the door will be open. And so there is some action on our part and some choice and some power in our part as well that goes into that. So I think it's really, life is about finding the balance between trusting in this thing that's bigger than you, and then also like being aware of the personal power that you do carry to impact and influence your life.
And I think, such a big part of what you're saying that these clients are saying is really, it's fessing up to fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, I know that a lot of, my clients that are addicts have done the thing where, you pray so much, God, please take this from me. God, please take this from me. And he just didn't take it. And really, when it comes down to it, it's, God, please take this from me because I don't want to give it up. I don't want to lay it down. I don't want to surrender it. So if you make the choice, it means that I don't have to make the choice, which is first order change. It's, I don't want to suffer the consequences, but I don't want to change anything about me in order to do that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's ultimately, I don't want to take responsibility for my life or my actions, which on a human level, I can also relate to. There's so many things in life I wish I didn't have to be responsible for. And it really puts you in this bind. I'm sure you've been in this situation. And even as a client, I love to ask the therapist sometimes, like, well, what do you think I should do? And, from sitting in the therapist chair, I always laugh because I'm like, this is the question. And then my clients will say, well, you never give me advice or you never tell me what to do. And I always throw that back to them of like, yeah, because there's no good outcome in that. Like if I tell you what to do, which I don't even believe ever that I know what's best for somebody. I really, really believe that the individual knows what's best for them far more than anyone else could ever know that, except in times of like extreme crisis and when people can't see clearly and need to go to treatment or something. But really that question or that wanting advice from other people, if I give you good advice or advice that works for you and you go out in the world and you think, wow, Megan really gave me great advice. Well, all that does is like, that gives me all the power. And so then you think that I'm like your genie and you need to keep coming back to me. But then if, it's really the kinder option to not give the advice, because then the person has the freedom to make their own decision. And then if it goes well, they can accept the responsibility for that. And if it doesn't go well, they can also accept the responsibility versus like if the therapist gives advice that doesn't work out, then it's the therapist's fault in that situation. So either way, somebody other than the individual is getting the credit. And so I think about that not only when I'm working with people, but also in my own life, whether it's in my own therapy or when I'm asking a parent or a friend what to do. I also am really aware of like, I want feedback and I want people to weigh in on my life, but ultimately I need to be making decisions for me so that I can take the responsibility for better or for worse.
And I also think that when you introduce fear into that equation, it makes it so much more difficult to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the beauty of recovery is it tries to boil things down, wherein it's not this insurmountable thing to proceed with. It's really, boiling it down to the principles of things. And so I think that one of the best things that a person can do is just try to get in touch with their feelings and really fess up to them. Mm-hmm. Because I think that once you name that feeling, once you say, I am afraid of this, it does it takes the air out of the balloon a little bit. It doesn't fix it. It doesn't mean that it's all of a sudden the easiest thing in the world, but it helps you at least. There's power in saying your emotions out loud. And so it helps you at least by acknowledging that, go, okay, I am definitely afraid in this situation. Mm-hmm. And really what I try to do with clients is we start there and then go, great, what are you afraid of? What is the danger that you are afraid is going to happen? Mm-hmm. And it's almost like we just start doing an autopsy on that feeling, getting down and getting down and getting down and getting down.
Yeah.
But, just doing the next right thing, to go back to what we were talking about, it's simple, but it's not easy. Mm-hmm. It seems like a big step for Sarah was acknowledging the pain from from her mother dying.
Mm-hmm.
And that was almost like a seam. It was like a seam in the book. Like she was able to turn pages after saying that she wasn't able to turn before. Because she certainly was able to connect with Derek in a different way. She certainly was able to connect with herself because she got back in touch with her passion for dance, which ended up leading her to Juilliard. Oh, did you know there's a sequel to this movie?
Oh
Save
my
the
God.
Last
Yeah,
Dance
but I don't
2?
think that they're in it, right? It's like a different cast.
They're not. It's the same characters. Yeah, different cast, same characters. And so it's like her experience at Juilliard,
Okay.
but none of the same people.
Yeah, I've never seen that. I
So
think
she
Julia
connected with Derek.
Stiles is really what does it for me in the movie.
Yeah, so she connected with Derek. She connected with herself. It seemed like she was able to connect better with her dad. So, I mean, it's really an example, I think, of when we do get in touch with what's going on inside of ourselves, that's where the work starts. And then it kind of goes outward from there.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to the recovery language or what you were talking about with feeling, it's like, you know, the first step is really the admitting step. And so I always think back to like, and often say to clients, like, feeling your feelings won't kill you, but ignoring them might. You know, and really that's a dramatic thing to say about, like, as humans, we spend a lot of our time trying to deny our hurts and our pains and different things that have happened in our lives. But I mean, I'm sure you see this in your office too. Overwhelmingly, when people start to admit things that they've never said out loud before, they see that it's actually far less scary than they had imagined. And it's really that isolation and the trying to bury it or push it away or push it down that actually causes us so much more pain than allowing it to surface and to talk about it, which, like you're saying, is really what we see in the movie.
That's a good segue into, I wonder if you could tell me something that your clients have taught you.
So much. I mean, part of what I love so much about the work I get to do with clients is clients are often so grateful for like how maybe I've impacted them, but I think there's like an equal rebound of I have just as much gratitude for all the gifts I get from being really privileged to work with the clients that I do. So I think the most, the things that stick out to me that I've learned from clients are it really, when clients allow themselves to be themselves, it's such a gift. And I often think, like, I had a client one time that said, like, hey, will you sit on the floor with me? And I was like, yeah, sure. And I wouldn't have thought of that. Like, I didn't think of that. But when a person or a client is really able to just allow themselves to go with whatever they feel they need, it's such a gift to me because, one, it makes me a better therapist. But then, two, in that session, it was such a, like, fruitful session after that because of some things we were able to do. And I thought to myself, gosh, I wish I would have had the courage to ask for something like that in my own therapy. But probably my own pride or shame would have kept me from doing that, or my own thinking that it wasn't allowed. And so it's really, really a gift to me when clients allow themselves just to be honest about what they need, what they want. And those are probably the moments that stand out to me the most when I think about the gifts I've gotten from clients. The other gift that I've really gotten from clients, which I think also is just like a extra bonus of the work that I get to do, is clients really help me see myself and see different parts of myself in a way that feels so true. Sometimes I remember the first time a client told me and like named my kindness, and they were ending their time in therapy, and part of what they were doing and saying goodbye to me was telling me, you know, different ways I've impacted them. And one of the things they were talking about is like, you are so kind, and this is how your kindness touched me, and this is how it impacted me. And I thought to myself, you know, I come from this culture. I played athletics my whole life and played at the collegiate level, and have really come from this place of like toughness and different things like that. But I've always really valued like the softer parts of me and the kinder parts of me, and clients really get to experience that. And then when they name that, it is such a gift to me. Like, I still remember the client who was telling me about the kindness, because I was thinking, like, that is so true. And that is so, like, true about who I am and my nature. And I am so grateful that this person got to experience that and is like telling me about it. It was such a gift, such a gift.
Yeah, it really seems like evidence as to the relational nature of therapy, because I'm sure that client was saying that because they had felt seen by you and connected with by you, and then by naming that and expressing it to you, you ended up feeling the same thing. Oh, you really saw a piece of the real me, and so it is just such a great example of connection. Yeah. So I wonder if you could, and this was something that I had started asking before the coronavirus social distancing protocol happened, but I feel like it's even more appropriate now to ask. But I wonder if you could share something that you do to take care of yourself.
Yeah, in this current season of coronavirus, I have grown a garden and have learned to play pickleball, and have been playing a lot of pickleball with friends, socially distanced and that sort of thing. But just because of my story and so many things around like physical activity and sports and that sort of thing, it's an important part of my life, but I have to be really careful about like finding ways that are fun and not like punishing or discouraging for me. So pickleball has been fun. Growing a garden has been fun. Really a way that I take care of myself is I am a person who needs like newness a lot. And so I need new things happening and new hobbies and new environments. So I've also, my family has a cabin about an hour and a half from here. So I've also on the weekends been getting out of Nashville, going there, turning my phone off, and just hanging out. So that's been really helpful. But really, before coronavirus and even now, so much of life and what I do to take care of myself looks very similar. I really allow a lot of space without my phone. Although most people in my life say that I never answer my phone, which is true. It's because it's always on silent. I'm not going to be a slave to my phone. So I respond to people's calls or respond to people's texts in certain windows of time. And that's something that I really have to do to take care of myself and not feel like I'm constantly available or on call. And then moving my body, in some way, whether it's yoga or pickleball or walks or whatever. And then the other thing that's really important to me is I have to have, like I said, I have to have new activities and new things to keep life fun and exciting. So the only thing that's gone away in coronavirus that I'm really sad about is I used to get massages quite frequently. And so I have not been able to do that lately, which is a big part of my self-care. So I've sort of missed that.
So let's say that somebody was listening to today's show and they just are thinking to themselves, they'd love to connect with you and become your client. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah. So best places to find me would be on my website, which is www.megan, which is MEGAN dash Moir, which is my last name, .com. So you can reach out to me there. You can also reach out to me on Instagram, which is just my name again, Megan Moir. And then I have a podcast that I do with another therapist, and it's called You Need Therapy. So you can find that on my website or on my Instagram or on our Instagram, which is You Need Therapy Podcast, spelled just like it sounds. So any of those places would be great. I also, primarily who I work with are people who fall into the high achiever category. So a lot of the work I do I see a lot of men and a lot of women, but people who kind of fall into buckets that are entrepreneurs, business people, musicians, athletes, anyone who would really consider themselves like, oh, I am a person who really achieves and has a lot going on in these different places, but need more help. So those are the types of people really that I also work with.
Very cool. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being my guest today. I can't even tell you how much of a joy it was. And I wish you all the best on the upcoming nuptials. I'm just so excited for you.
Thanks, Josh. It was so fun to be with you today. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.